I never thought the worst moment of my life would come after my mom died. I was sitting in the front pew of the church, clutching a crumpled tissue in one hand and the funeral program in the other, trying to hold myself together. My mother, Mara Ray, had passed away just 3 days before. 54 years old, too young, too soon. And somehow, despite the grief gnawing at my chest, I felt like I had to stay composed, like I had to be the one holding it together for everyone else. That's when my cousin Landon stood up. He cleared his throat dramatically as if he were about to give a heartfelt tribute. I turned to look at him, hopeful for once that someone in our family might finally say something kind about my mom. But the smirk on his face told me otherwise, and then, in front of the entire church, he said it. Let's not pretend Mara was something she wasn't. She was just a gold digger who got lucky. That's it. And people laughed. They laughed. I couldn't believe it. My heart dropped straight into my stomach. My eyes darted around the room. Some were chuckling under their breath. Others nodded slightly, like they'd been waiting for someone to say it out loud. I was frozen, humiliated, furious, and utterly heartbroken. My mom had spent her whole life keeping her head down, being quiet, being kind, even when people whispered behind her back. And now, on the day she was supposed to be honored and remembered, they were tearing her apart like she was some kind of dirty family secret. I was about to stand up, about to scream at all of them, when suddenly I heard the priest clear his throat behind me. Father Connolly, the man who had been our family's priest for over 2 decades, stepped forward. His eyes were calm but serious, scanning the congregation. And then he said something none of us were expecting. Mara left a letter. She asked me to read it today, in front of you all. The room went silent. You could feel the shift in the air, like the temperature dropped 10 degrees. Landon sat down quickly, his smirk now gone. I felt the blood drain from my face. I had no idea what was in that letter. My mom hadn't told me she'd written anything. Father Connolly pulled out a sealed envelope from his pocket and held it up for everyone to see. Then he unfolded the paper slowly, cleared his throat again, and began to read. And what came next? What he read out loud to that room full of smug, heartless people changed everything. I should probably tell you what kind of woman my mom really was. Not the version my family made up, the one they whispered about behind fake smiles and forced hugs. No, I mean the real Mara Ray. She wasn't flashy. She didn't wear designer clothes or throw around my dad's last name to get special treatment. She hated attention, hated drama. She was the kind of woman who found joy in quiet things. Her morning tea, the humming of the dishwasher, our late-night talks in the kitchen while the rest of the world slept. When she married my dad, Thomas Ray, she didn't know he came from old money. They met at the hardware store she worked at back in Ohio. She was 29, working 2 jobs, raising me alone after my birth father disappeared, and trying her best to survive. My dad was nothing like the rest of his family. He was kind, grounded, thoughtful, the kind of man who drove a 10-year-old truck even though he could afford 10 brand new ones. He saw something in my mom, something no one else in his world ever bothered to look for. He fell hard, and he didn't care what anyone thought. But they did. His family never really forgave him for marrying her. To them, she was a nobody, a waitress, a single mom with no pedigree, no polished accent, no family name to trace back 5 generations. They called her sweet, but they meant it like it was a flaw, like she was slow or simple, like she didn't belong. They never said it directly, not to her face. They were too classy for that. But the tone was always there, the snide comments, the exclusion. The way they'd talk about vacations and events right in front of her, ones she was never invited to. And she never fought it. She just smiled, nodded politely, and focused on being a good wife. A good mom. I remember asking her once, "Why don't you ever speak up? Why don't you tell them how they make you feel?" She just looked at me and said, "People will say what they want, baby. But when you know who you are, you don't need to scream it." After my dad passed, cancer stage 4, it happened fast, the family cut ties almost completely. Oh, they showed up for the legal stuff, of course. Money makes people show up, but emotionally, they were gone. My mom got a small portion of the estate, just enough to keep our house and cover some bills. Most of it was tied up in trusts and businesses and things I didn't understand back then. But she never fought them for more. She never hired a lawyer. She said she didn't want to fight over scraps. I didn't understand it then. Honestly, I was angry at her for it. I thought she was weak, but now I know she was protecting me. She didn't want to raise me in courtrooms or give me a front row seat to the kind of ugliness she'd already endured. Over the years, she got quieter, a little sadder maybe, but never bitter. She made peace with the hand she was dealt. Even when her health started declining last year, she kept it from almost everyone, including me. She didn't want pity. She didn't want people to come around just because she was dying. And she definitely didn't want them at her funeral if all they were going to do was fake their grief. But they came anyway. The aunts, the cousins, the old money smiles and diamond brooches. They showed up to the church like it was a damn red carpet event, hugging me like we were close, telling me she was such a sweet soul, such a delicate spirit when they never even called her in the last 10 years. And for a second, just a second, I thought maybe this would be okay. Maybe people would rise above the drama, say a few kind words, let her rest in peace. But I should have known better, because then Landon stood up, and all that peace shattered. The priest had just finished a soft, respectful prayer when it happened. People shifted in their seats. The smell of lilies and wood polish hung in the air like a suffocating blanket. I kept my eyes down, trying to hold it together. That's when I heard his voice, Landon. He cleared his throat, loud and obnoxious, like he wanted all eyes on him. And trust me, he got them. "I know no one asked me to speak," he began, glancing around like he was on stage, "but I think it's time we stop pretending." There was this weird pause, the kind of silence where you can feel something bad coming, but you can't move fast enough to stop it. And then he said it. "Let's not act like Mara was anything other than what she was, a gold digger who got lucky." I blinked. I thought I'd misheard. Then I saw the smirks. Aunt Valerie actually laughed. Uncle Brent looked at the floor, but he didn't look surprised. A few of the younger cousins exchanged raised eyebrows like they'd just heard a juicy secret confirmed. It was like watching a nightmare unfold in slow motion. "She came into this family from nothing," Landon continued, "and somehow walked away with everything. My uncle was vulnerable, sick, and she took full advantage." I stood up without realizing I had. My hands were shaking, my nails digging into the side of the pew, but I couldn't speak. My throat closed up. My jaw was clenched so tight it hurt. I looked at the priest, then at the people around me. No one was stopping him. No one was saying, "That's enough." I locked eyes with Landon, and for a second I thought he was done. Then he added, "I'm not saying she was evil, I'm just saying she played her cards right." And with that, he sat back down. Like what he said wasn't the most disgusting thing I'd ever heard. I felt everyone watching me, waiting to see if I'd cry or scream or walk out. I felt like a little girl again, powerless in a room full of adults who never once tried to see the truth about my mother. And that's what broke me, because my mom, Mara, didn't get lucky. She gave everything. She gave up her pride to marry into a family that never accepted her. She gave up peace to care for my father while he died slowly. She gave up her own dreams to raise me in a house full of judgment and isolation. And even when she was hurting, even when her body started giving out last year, she still kept giving. I took one shaky breath. I was just about to walk out when I heard a voice from behind. "That's enough." It was quiet but sharp, and it came from the one person no one expected to speak up. Father Connolly. He stepped forward slowly, unfolding a piece of paper he pulled from his jacket. His face was calm, but his eyes, they burned with something fierce. He said, "Mara asked me to read this today, in front of everyone. Her words, not mine." The church went quiet. You could feel it. This collective stillness, like everyone suddenly remembered where they were and who they were there for. Landon shifted in his seat, that smug little grin finally fading. Aunt Valerie looked confused, maybe even a little nervous. Me? I couldn't move. I had no idea what was in that letter. My mom hadn't told me she wrote one. And if I'd known, I would have assumed it was something quiet and sweet, something polite, the kind of thing that would let them off the hook. But as Father Connolly unfolded the page, I saw his hands tremble slightly. And that's when I realized this wasn't going to be polite. This was going to be truth. And for the first time in that awful day, I felt the tiniest flicker of hope because my mom was about to speak. And this time, they were going to listen. I didn't breathe as Father Connolly raised the letter to eye level. His fingers brushed the edge of the page like it was sacred. In a way, it was. I watched the room that had just laughed at my mother, the same people who had ignored her, judged her, called her names when they thought no one was listening. Now they were silent, watching, waiting. And for the first time, they were nervous. The letter started like you'd expect. Thank you for being here today. I know not everyone came out of love, but you came, and that counts for something. Even in death, she was being generous, too generous, but then the tone changed. There are a few things I've never said out loud. Maybe I didn't have the strength. Maybe I was trying to protect Jenna. Maybe I just knew you wouldn't really hear me until I was gone. The whole church leaned in. Even Landon looked rattled now. His jaw was clenched tight, but he wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. You all thought you knew me. Some of you called me quiet. Some called me lucky. Some used worse words behind my back. Gold digger, parasite, nobody. A few people shifted in their seats. But I never married Thomas for money. I didn't even know he had money when I met him. I thought he was just a sweet man with sad eyes and pain on his hands. That part hit me. Hard. My dad used to do oil painting on the weekends. She always said she fell for the way he talked about colors like they were alive. When I found out he was wealthy, I offered to walk away. I didn't want that kind of life. But he told me something I never forgot. He said, "You make me feel like a person again, Mara. Not a paycheck, not a name, just a man." So I stayed. For him. By now, you could hear a pin drop. When Thomas got sick, none of you came around, not once. Not when he started forgetting things. Not when he couldn't walk. Not when he lost his speech and started crying because he couldn't remember Jenna's name. I was the one who cleaned him, fed him, held him when he sobbed like a child. I did it alone, and I never once asked for anything from any of you. People were crying now. I don't think they even realized it. I could see Aunt Valerie dabbing her eyes, mascara smudged on her fingertips. Landon still wasn't looking up. After Thomas passed, I didn't fight for more money because I didn't want my daughter to grow up believing love was something you had to prove with lawyers. I had what I needed. I had Jenna. My throat tightened. I didn't even know she knew I blamed her for not fighting harder. I'd held that anger inside me for years, and just like that, it was gone. Landon, I forgave you a long time ago. You were angry, I get that. You wanted your uncle's attention, his approval. But that wasn't mine to give. I hope you find peace. He finally looked up. His face was pale, his mouth open like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. To the rest of you, if you still believe I was nothing more than someone who got lucky, then maybe that's because you measure value in the wrong things. I didn't take from this family. I gave to it. I just did it quietly. And if you missed it, that's on you. Father Connolly paused. He looked over the crowd like he was trying to decide whether to keep reading. Then he turned to me, gave a small nod, and read the last lines. "Jenna, my sweet girl, don't waste your life trying to convince people who refuse to see you. Keep your head up. You come from strength, not money, remember that." I couldn't stop the tears then. I didn't want to. My mom had never raised her voice in that family. Not once. But with that letter, she had taken back every stolen moment of dignity. She didn't leave quietly. She left with truth. And in that moment, the balance in the room shifted. She wasn't the outsider anymore. She was the only person in that room who ever had real power. Because she spoke without hate, without spite, and still managed to gut them all. When the priest folded the letter and placed it back in his pocket, no one moved. It felt like the room had been flipped upside down. All that fake sympathy, all that smugness, gone. Replaced with silence, shame, and something none of them ever expected to feel when they thought of my mom: respect. But Father Connolly wasn't done. He looked around slowly, then cleared his throat once more. "There's something else Mara left behind." He walked to the side of the altar and picked up a small black box. I hadn't seen it before. He opened it gently and held up a stack of legal papers. "This is a statement of donation, signed and verified. Mara donated over $650,000 in Thomas's name to cancer research, the same amount she could have fought for after his death. She chose not to. Instead, she gave it away, under one condition." People leaned forward. She requested the donation be made under the name of one of the Ray grandchildren, specifically Landon. There was an audible gasp. I turned to look at him. His face was blank, his eyes wide, blinking fast like he couldn't process what was happening. You could see the color drain out of his face like water down a sink. "She said she hoped it would help you build a better legacy," Father Connolly added. Landon looked like he wanted to disappear. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. The priest continued. "But she didn't stop there. Mara also wrote a letter to the board of the Ray Family Foundation, the same foundation that denied her a seat after Thomas passed. She left her journals, her photos, proof of every hour she spent at her husband's bedside, copies of unpaid hospital bills she quietly covered herself. Her request was simple: that her name be added to the official family history archive as Thomas's wife and caregiver." He paused. "The board approved it 2 weeks before she died." That was it. That was the moment. In one single day, my mother, the woman they dismissed, excluded, and erased, became undeniable. She rewrote the legacy they tried so hard to bury her out of, not with lawyers or shouting or revenge, but with grace, facts, and the kind of strength they never saw coming. Aunt Valerie was openly crying now. Uncle Brent stood up slowly and walked to the back of the church. The cousins avoided eye contact with everyone, suddenly fascinated with their shoes. And Landon? He didn't move, didn't speak, just sat there, trapped in a moment where the person he tried to humiliate had just handed him everything he ever wanted, and done it with more dignity than he'd ever shown anyone in his life. Me? I couldn't stop smiling. Through the tears, through the grief, I felt this overwhelming surge of pride, because in the end, my mother won. She left behind more than a letter. She left behind truth. She left behind a room full of people who would never forget her name, no matter how hard they tried. She left behind a daughter who finally understood that silence isn't weakness, it's power, held until the exact moment it matters most. And in that room, packed with people who thought they knew who Mara Ray was, she made every single one of them listen. After the service ended, nobody rushed out. People lingered in the pews, quiet, stunned, like they'd just witnessed something sacred, something they weren't prepared for. They came in thinking they were attending a funeral for someone forgettable, someone nice but irrelevant. But they left with the weight of truth on their shoulders. Truth wrapped in dignity, wrapped in the voice of a woman who had spent her entire life being overlooked. I stood there by the altar for a long time, just watching them sit in silence, watching Landon stare at the floor like the words were still echoing in his head, watching Aunt Valerie try to pull herself together, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief that looked as fake as her sympathy. Some came up to me, said the usual things. I didn't know. She was stronger than we thought. Your mother had such grace. I nodded. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. Their faces said everything. And then Landon walked up to me. He didn't say a word at first, just stood there, holding the folded copy of the donation letter in his hands. His mouth opened like he was going to speak, but he didn't. He just looked at me and then walked away. That was enough. Because some things don't need closure. Some people don't deserve it. That night, I went home and opened the box my mom had left me. It was full of little things. Her journals, photos, an old pair of earrings she always wore when she wanted to feel strong. At the bottom was a handwritten note, just for me. You don't owe anyone your silence, but you also don't owe them your rage. Just live better, live free. I cried harder reading that than I had the whole week, because my mom didn't just survive that family. She outlived their bitterness with grace they couldn't begin to understand. She didn't scream at the people who disrespected her. She didn't fight them in court or try to humiliate them. She outloved them. She protected her daughter, gave quietly, and when the time came, she told her truth in a way no one could ignore. In the weeks after the funeral, something started to shift. People who hadn't spoken to me in years suddenly wanted to reconnect. Extended relatives sent messages, trying to rewrite their place in her story. But I didn't respond to most of them. Not out of spite, but because I finally understood something my mother had known all along. Not everyone who shares your blood is your family. Family is who protects you when no one's watching. Family is who shows up when there's nothing to gain. Family is who tells the truth, even when it hurts, because they love you that much. And for all those years, I thought my mother was weak, but the truth is, she was the strongest person in the room. Every room. She just didn't need to prove it while she was alive. She let them laugh. She let them whisper. She let them believe what they wanted. And then, when it mattered most, she made sure her voice was the last one they heard. And now, every time I think of her, I don't think of that moment at the funeral when Landon stood up and tried to tear her down. I think of what happened after. I think of the silence, the truth, the shift, the way she stood taller in death than most of them ever did in life. And I remind myself every single day that I come from that kind of strength, that kind of legacy, and no one will ever laugh at her name again.